When it was morning and completely light, King Thidrek stood up and had his horns blown. And immediately Prince Thether had his horns blown, and Markgraf Rodinger did the same. They all got up and armed themselves. And when they came to their horses, Master Hildebrand rode first and carried King Thidrek's standard. And immediately after him rode King Thidrek. And all of his men rode one after the other. They all rode down to the ford that Hildebrand had used the night before. And when the Amlungs saw this, Sifka had the horns of King Erminrek blown. And when Vidga and Reinald heard that, they had their horns blown, calling all of their men to arm themselves and prepare themselves for battle. Vidga sprang onto his horse scamming, with all of his weapons, and he was ready to fight. Reinald did the same with his men. Valtari of Waskenstein came to his horse, and he carried in his hand the standard of King Erminrek. And that standard was made in this way. The outer part of the standard was made of silk as black as ravens. The next part was silk as bright as gold. And the third part was green as grass. Around the outside of the standard were 70 tinkling bells of gold. And this standard rings and rattles, so that it can be heard all around the army, whenever it is carried by a rider or blown by the wind. After it rode Sifka, with all his division, 6,000 knights and many sergeants. When King Thidrek saw the standard of King Erminrek, and knew that Sifka's troop must be there, he called out to Master Hildebrand that he should carry their standard toward him. It was made of white silk, and there was a lion of gold with a crown on it. And there were also bells of gold, no fewer than 70. Queen Erka had the standard made and given to King Thidrek. And the two troops now rode together. Reinald rode with his group, and his standard was made in this fashion. It was of silk, as red as blood, and up above, in the middle, and on the tips, there were 3 buttons of gold. He directed his army against Markgraf Rodinger. Vidga rode also with his army. His standard was borne by the strong Runga. Not even a giant could be found who was as strong as he was. The standard was black and had hammer and tongs and an anvil painted on it in white. Against him rode Duke Naudung, and he carried in his hands a standard of white with a lion in gold on it. This standard had been given to Thether by Queen Erka. And behind it rode Prince Thether and the 2 sons of King Attila, Erb and Ordwin, along with the good knight Hjalprek, who was the most courteous and courageous of knights. Their troop was dressed in red gold, so that the light glanced off them like fire. These 6 troops now rode together. King Didrik of Bern rode forward on his horse Falka, with his good sword Thidrekssaga, and he struck on both sides at men and horses, and each fell over the other as he went. Before him, Master Hildebrand rode with his standard, and he killed many men on each side, and their good comrade Vildifer followed them boldly. And this battle was exceedingly fierce, and many Amlungs fell from Sifka's troop. King Thidrek called out loudly and urged his men on, saying, "Forward, men, and fight with great courage and boldness. You have often fought with Rus and Vilkina men, and we have most often gained the victory. But in this battle, we attack our own land, and we shall be called great men if we retake our homeland. From now on, this reception will be even more vehement." King Thidrek rode now into the middle of Sifka's troop and killed men and horses and everything that came before him. He rode through the whole army and then back another way. He frightened everyone, and no one dared stand before him wherever he rode, and he had already killed countless men. Vildifer rode another path through the Amlungs' army. Wherever he went in the army, there fell Amlungs, and no one could keep his horse and his weapons before him. He had now killed many chieftains, and he was still not wounded. Valtari of Vaskerstein saw what damage Vildifer was doing to the Amlungs, and how they were fleeing before him wherever he came forward. Valtari rode at him boldly, and aimed the spear to which the standard was attached at his chest, and the spear went through him and out the back. Vildifer struck off the spear shaft in front of him, and rode at Valtari, and struck at his body against the saddle, and split his birnie. And his blow came to rest in the saddle, and each fell dead to the earth from his horse. When Sifka saw that his standard had fallen, and that the mighty champion Valtari had fallen, he turned his horse away and fled, and all his men went with him. But King Thidrek and all his men pursued the fleeing men and killed them all day long, and they pursued them the whole day and did not stop until the greatest part of the army had been killed. King Thidrek rode a long time before he ceased and turned back. Vidga now saw that Sifka was fleeing with all of his men, and that the Amlungs were not gaining the victory if it went in other places as it did here. Vidga rode forward boldly. He saw where Duke Naudung was riding and killing many men. Vidga rode at him, and each rode at the other. And at first there was a ferocious battle, and their combat ended when Vidga raised up the sword Mimung in one hand and struck the standard staff in two, so that the standard fell to the earth. And at this moment he struck a second blow at his neck, so that it cut asunder his byrnie and his neck, and each part, his head and his body, fell to the ground. And the young princess saw that. Ordwin spoke with Hjalprek, his comrade. Can you see how the evil dog Vidga is doing damage to our man? He has now killed our Duke Naudung. Let us ride at him, and not let him continue in this way. After this, Ordwin rode boldly at Vidga, and Hjalprek went with him. He was met by the strong Runga, and the battle became amazingly fierce. And before it ended, Ordwin fell dead to the ground, along with his comrade Hjalprek. And when Erp and Thether saw that, they rode forward boldly, and Thether fought fiercely with Runga. Thether struck a mighty blow at his helmet, and split his helmet and his head, so that his sword came to rest in his shoulders, and Runga fell dead to the earth. During this time, Vidga had killed Erp. When Thether saw that both the princes, Erp and Ordwin, had been killed, he rode angrily at Vidga, determined to lose his life or to avenge his foster brothers. He struck often and hard at Vidga. And Vidga spoke. Is it you, Thether, the brother of King Didrik of Bern? I recognize you. Ride away to another place. For his sake, I do not wish to do you any harm, and I will fight against other men. And Thether answered, God knows that, because my princes Erp and Ordwin have fallen, and you, evil dog, have killed them. I do not wish to live unless I have avenged them. It shall either turn out that you strike me dead from my horse, or I shall be your killer. And Thether struck him twice as hard, and attacked even harder. Vidga spoke. God knows, as well as I do, that if I kill you, I am doing it against my will, because of your brother King Didrik of Bern. And Thether struck at Vidga's helmet with all his strength. But this helmet was so hard that no steel was harder. His blow glanced off the helmet and came down in front of the saddle horn, so that it took off the horse's head in front of the saddle. And there, Vidga's horse Skemming lost his life. Vidga spoke as he stood on the ground. Holy God knows that I shall now do the deed I never thought I would do, no matter what would force me. Either I shall lose my life, or I shall kill you. Vidga now took the hilt of his sword in both hands, and raised it up, and struck at Thether's back, so that the sword cut the byrnie and his torso in two, and he fell in two parts to the earth. After this, a great battle arose, and Vidga killed many men, and he also lost many of the Amlungs. We are taking a break from this battle by ending part 63 here, at one of the most tragic events of any battle of the Thidrekssaga so far. But the battle will still go on, and people will still keep on fighting and die in part 64, back here in the Hall of Sagenheim.